coming today. My name is Lily. I'm with the City of Harrisburg. I work at DBHD department. I will be introducing Tasha. She is the program manager that will be in charge of working with you guys with all the sub-recipients. We will be introducing Linda, who is on our asset team, who will be processing the invoices when you guys submit them in. We will also introduce Eric Chapman. He's our consultant who will be conducting the workshop. So I'd like to I'd like to say thank you for attending. Tasha.
Well, thank you again for all coming out on such short notice and in the rain. So during the process, I will be the primary point of contact for everybody throughout the process. So you'll be sending me your quarterly reports, and you'll just communicate any questions directly to me. I will be the one coming out and doing all of your monitoring. So we will be doing that as needed. So it will be very frequent at first, and then as we all get familiar with the process, it will lessen. So I will be your primary point of contact, asking you all of your questions, and I will walk you through the process. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Eric Chapman, and he will get this workshop going. So thank you again for coming.
Hey, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Chapman with Civitas. As the ladies mentioned, we're consultant. My firm is consultant for the city on all of their HUD-funded programs. Yes, I have a card. I can share my card. But again, Tasha will be your point of contact, and my team provides support to staff directly. So we won't likely be working with you guys directly, but more directly with staff. The purpose of this workshop is to, number one, hopefully provide more information to all the potential subrecipients and existing subrecipients of these funds about what it is that's required. At the end of the day, these are federal funds, and they come with lots and lots and lots of strings and regulations. The city has come under scrutiny over the last few years with HUD about how it manages these programs, and so quite frankly, we're improving the city's management processes and the requirements, and that requires us to implement some changes on how we work with and provide funding to outside agencies. One of the major concerns that HUD has had with activities or projects that have been funded by the city of Harrisburg over the last few years is documenting, number one, that it's eligible, that what they're funding is eligible, and that the people that benefited are eligible. So as the gentleman in the back mentioned in his introduction, he said seniors are presumed to be eligible. But can anybody tell us, first with the CDBG program, is anybody familiar and know what is the primary objective of the CDBG funds? I mean, every major city and county and every state in the country receives these funds, have since 1974. Harrisburg's received these funds every year since 1974. Can anybody tell us what the primary objective of the program is?
It's community development.
Well, for who? But who should benefit from that?
From the residents of a particular municipality.
So it's Harrisburg. So who in Harrisburg should be the beneficiaries of this program?
Harrisburg residents.
And more specifically, low income, low to moderate income. Okay?
Right.
And over the past few years, the city has had trouble documenting, and quite frankly with subrecipients, documenting that the primary beneficiaries of programs funded with CDBG funds are low to moderate income residents of Harrisburg. So part of what I want to share with you today is how we document that. And so you have in front of you, or was on your chair, a little packet of various information. I first want to suggest to you and strongly encourage that if you intend to receive or are currently receiving or are about to receive CDBG or ESG funds, that you make yourself quite familiar with the website I have up here, and it's just called the HUD Exchange. You go to Google and type in HUD Exchange and you'll find this website. On the HUD Exchange are all the rules and all the requirements and all the various forms that HUD requires. So when you have a question about what's eligible, what's not, what's cost or eligible, how do I document this, Is my program or my activity eligible? All the answers can be found here. For the CDBG program specifically, the manual, if you will, published by HUD, is referred to as basically CDBG. It's the training manual. You've got 2 chapters in front of you, chapters 6 and 7. And I'm not going to read these to you, but I want to point out a few things to you. Chapter 6 I'll look at first. It's titled Public Facilities, Special Assessments, and Privately Owned Utilities. The City of Harrisburg, through its application process, allows for outside agencies to request funding to improve their facility. Well, all facilities are not eligible. This chapter tells us how we can determine that it's eligible. So first off, the activity, the facility has to be public. And for HUD's definition, public means, of course, obviously owned by the city or another local unit of government. But also, if a nonprofit owns the building or the facility, then it can be considered a public facility. Now, there's more definitions and nuances to that in this chapter. But for example, YMCA is here. I assume the YMCA owns some sort of community center type facility. That facility could be improved, a new roof put on, parking lot repaved, new basketball gym, whatever. That would be eligible under public facility, hypothetically. If a for-profit owns it and you're just leasing it, it's not a public facility. You have to own it outright or have at least a 50-year long-term lease on it, okay, to consider it to be a public facility. Now, all public facilities aren't just eligible by themselves. And what I want to point out to you, if you'll look with me, on page 6-3, so it's really just turn your page 1. 6-3, the first check mark here. And again, I'm not going to read chapters to you, but I strongly encourage you, if you're receiving public facility improvement funds or think this is something you might apply for in the next cycle, be very familiar with everything in this chapter. But what it says here in this first chapter check mark on page 6-3 is that a public facility may qualify under what's referred to as the limited clientele criteria. I've reviewed all of the applications for funding, and I can tell you that what everybody in here is presuming to do or assuming to do with CDBG is HUD would refer to as you serve a limited clientele, limited population. Everybody that describe what they do, they're going to serve a specific group of people, a specific population here in Harrisburg. In other words, your recovery programs and the immigrant programs and the fair housing and dispute programs, it's not everybody in Harrisburg. It's some people in Harrisburg. Okay, now if those folks are 51% of them are considered low to moderate income, then your program would be considered eligible. So I'm going to go through these criteria here. So if you're offering a service to any group of people that are residents of Harrisburg, the majority of the people participating in your program, whatever that might be, whether it's substance abuse, reentry program, fair housing dispute, immigrant counseling and integration, whatever the program is, youth programs, after-school programs, child care, there's all kinds of things that are eligible. But at least half of the people that participate have to be from Harrisburg and from low to moderate income households. Okay? Now, as the gentleman in the back mentioned, some folks are considered by HUD to be presumed to be low to moderate income, meaning I don't necessarily have to check their income status, because HUD suggests that by the census information for the entire country, certain groups of population are considered to be low to moderate income nationally. And you can see that in this sort of the third little dash here under that check mark, serving a group primarily presumed to be LMI. Battered and abused women and children, elderly persons, disabled adults, homeless, illiterate adults, persons with AIDS, and migrant farm workers. Does anybody's program primarily serve a group of people that are on that list? What do y'all serve? Okay, but you serve one of those. You serve seniors.
Seniors, right.
Right, so that program, assuming that the seniors are from Harrisburg, would generally be considered to be eligible. Now what I want to point out is youth are not on that list. Right? Substance abuse, immigrants, they're not on that list. So if the group is not presumed to be low income, then we have to document their low income status. Okay, and with that, I'll take you to a little bit further in your package. The last two sheets, you have a little table with income limits in a form called self-certification. So the little table here, the City of Harrisburg 2019 CDBG income limits, and it's based on household size. To be eligible or considered low to moderate income, the household, based on their household size, has to be at or below 80% of the area median income, which is, I know this is in black and white, but it's the highlighted row at the bottom. So you have to have, if you're not on the presumed list, so you're not serving one of those that everybody just assume that they're low to moderate income, then all of your participants have to refer to this sheet and then fill out the other sheet here, the annual income self-certification form.
Is this still in chapter 6?
No, it's further in your packet.
Oh, here?
That one, and then the self-certification.
Okay.
Is there a digital version of this on the website?
There will be.
Who are you?
I'm a consultant for the city. I'm helping the city get right.
I thought they were right already.
No, they ain't. I'm not picking on staff, but no, they ain't right. So,
I don't want to disrupt your flow, but I have one brief question. From a legal standpoint, if you are on that list of presumptive eligible, within that presumptive eligible category, does that confer any standing? Or what I mean by that is, does it mean that you don't have to move to the next step? Does it mean that you are put in a particular pool? What does that do? I mean, so there's...
I'll get to that.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
Yeah, I'll absolutely.
Thank you. And tell me your name again.
Eric, Chatham.
Okay, Eric.
Last name, please?
Chatham.
Thank
Chatham.
you. Okay.
So if your program is not serving one of these presumed classes, let's just say where you're doing a youth program, after school or summer program, the first thing you've got to do is document that the kids are actually from households that are City of Harrisburg, right? Then you've got to confirm that at least 51% of the kids not only are from Harrisburg, but are from low to moderate income households. Now, we don't need to go get tax returns and have parents turn in pay stubs and all kinds of stuff. They look at this little table, which you would have in your intake package, and then this self-certification, and they fill out this form. And it basically says, an adult in the household would say, we're a family of 4, they'll put in their income, you'll cross-reference against this table, you'll confirm that they're below, family of 4, below roughly $65,000, then they're considered to be eligible for this program. Now that doesn't mean that somebody that's over income is not qualified to participate in the after-school program. You just have to, as an agency, as a sub-recipient, confirm that at least 51% of the kids participating are from low to moderate income households. Okay. So this income self-certification form, and you'll get up, as HUD updates the income limits to 2020, you'll get those. And this self-certification form, you'll be receiving those if you're a sub-recipient. These have to be completed in your file. So when Tasha mentions, where'd Tasha go? Tasha stepped down. When Tasha comes to monitor you, as she said in her introduction, when she comes to your site and you tell her, well, we served 400 kids last month, she's going to be looking for 400 of these forms, all filled out in your files. Okay? And that's what we don't have right now. We don't have backup documentation to confirm this. Okay? So, if you are one of the presumed classes, and again, looking back on, it's going to be listed in Chapter 6, and it'll be in Chapter 7 again, but I'll read those again. Batter and abused women and children, severely disabled adults, homeless persons, illiterate adults, persons with AIDS, and migrant farm workers. If your program primarily serves those, then what we're going to be looking for is whatever your application intake document is of your organization, you're going to confirm that status. So I assume if you're going to serve seniors, that you have some way of confirming that they're seniors and that they're from Harrisburg, right? Yes, ma'am.
My question is, as a HUD counseling agency, we have a form similar,
Sure.
and I just want to make sure we don't have to duplicate the information. Does it have to be on this form, or does it
Has to be on the City of Harrisburg's form.
So
Yes, ma'am.
we would have to have them do the HUD form and this form.
Sure. Yes, ma'am. Yep. Okay, so when you're talking about a program, let's say that there is under public facilities, an eligible public facility would be a shelter, if you will, a halfway house for battered and abused women. So they present themselves in needing services at this facility. Well, CDBG funds could be used to rehab that facility, put a new roof on it, furnish the facility so that it can accommodate victims of domestic violence. Okay? All that means then in your intake is you're confirming, unfortunately, that they are victims of domestic violence, but you're going to confirm that through your program's intake, and that they came from Harrisburg. Right? I'm from South Carolina. Your programs can't serve people from South Carolina that just showed up here. That's not, this is for Harrisburg. Okay? Now that's not to say that your programs can't have people that live out in the county or even live in other counties. But 51%, I'm just going to keep saying that, 51% or more have to be from Harrisburg and meet one of these qualifications. Either they self-certify their income as being low to moderate income, or you're confirming their status under one of these presumed classes. Okay? Any questions on that? Yes, sir. In the back.
Just the bullet underneath that, serving a group primarily presumed, yada, yada, yada. Just under that, it says being of such a nature and in a location that it may be concluded.
Yep, so I'll tell you this, the city has asked you all in all of your applications for many years, what is the primary service area of your program? No one's using the area benefit. That was a question that need not be asked. Because all of you are serving people that come into your program, and the people must be qualified, right? So what this refers to, though, the nature and location. If you are operating a homeless shelter, who's going to benefit from a homeless shelter? So by nature, we can assume that the people that are going to show up and ask for help at a homeless shelter are qualified. That's all that means. Okay? By location as well, what that really means, for example, if I don't think anybody from the Housing Authority is here, but if we were to offer a program for after-school tutoring at a public housing complex for kids that live in the public housing, well, by that location, we can assume residents of public housing are definitely low to moderate income. So by that presumption, we can assume that everybody participating, because we had a caveat to participate, you must live in public housing, then we can say by location that it's presumed to benefit.
Very quick question, don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but there's a contiguous area contiguous to Harrisburg, Edgemont. Basically the same demographics as Harrisburg itself. Or Steelton, take Steelton for instance, same demographics. If they come from that area, then are they assumed to fit into that category by virtue of location?
Can anybody help them?
It has to be in the city.
It has to be Harrisburg.
Yes, correct.
So your program serve 100 people. 51 of them have to be seniors from Harrisburg. And the other people could be millionaires from Manhattan. It doesn't matter. Literally. That part doesn't matter. But if the city's going to invest CDBG funding, the primary beneficiaries of whatever it is you're delivering, whether it's a facility or a program or services, have to be low-income residents of Harrisburg.
But 51% is the magic number.
That's the magic number.
So just because they're low income from Steelton or another neighboring area doesn't help.
Fine, it doesn't help, but you're welcome to serve them, and there's no limitation to that.
They can be in the 49.
But the city doesn't want to be putting city dedicated funding into a program that 60% of the people are from, where's Steelton?
Okay.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
May I ask one further question about this and then I'll stop?
No, it's okay, ask it, this is,
Okay, I'm trying to be helpful to the entire group. But with respect to the 51% threshold and with respect to the presumption, it's that sort of legal term presumption of eligibility. So if that's the case, is it still a requirement that that presumptive eligible entity move through all of those steps that you outlined?
the only step that they get to skip is they get to skip the income self-certification.
Okay, that's important.
That's it.
Okay.
So a senior can come to your service, and I'm just because he said senior, and I know that
No, that's fine.
that's
I
easy. The senior, as long as he or she is from Harrisburg, can be a millionaire. They are eligible. They count towards your presumed benefit. Okay? Because HUD says, and the census really is where they get it from,
Right.
51% of seniors in America are considered low to moderate income. So HUD then says, you, Harrisburg, get to assume that all your seniors are low to moderate income. So I don't have to ask them for income information, but I have to confirm that they're Harrisburg seniors. And that would be the same for any of these other battered and abused women and children. If I got a domestic violence shelter, I need to confirm that they were from Harrisburg to begin with. I don't have to then get any further. I don't have to ask them for income self-certification.
Thank you, that's very
That
helpful.
contradicts with what's stated here, where it starts, in that first bullet, the next to last sentence, where it says, at least 51% must be low and moderate income. So when you just said the person from Harrisburg, and if they're making $1 million, it doesn't matter.
Not a person, a senior.
Well, a senior.
Because
from
HUD,
Harrisburg.
the third bullet here, these populations, HUD says, because nationally, the majority of these people from one of these presumed classes
Correct.
are low income, then you get to presume that they're all low income in your community.
Okay.
So a program that primarily serves domestic violence, I don't necessarily have to ask for income. Now, let's be honest, let's look at the income sheet. A household of 4 making $65,000 is still qualified. So my guess is many of you have programs where people are going to qualify anyway. So I don't necessarily have to, this is probably not going to be that big an issue is what I'm getting at, right? That's a pretty substantial amount of income. So again, we're just documenting that 51% are either presumed to be or are actually low to moderate income. Okay? And so some of you have programs that are specifically designed to help homeless or disabled or illiterate adults, persons with AIDS, etc. And so those programs get to presume. In that case, we document that at least 51% are from Harrisburg. A youth program is not presumed. So now we have to document that at least 51% are from Harrisburg and low to moderate income from Harrisburg. Okay. Questions on that?
Yeah.
So, yep, sir.
Okay, so could you help explain the low mod area benefit and some examples of where that does apply in CDBG use?
So, an area benefit is probably only going to be used by the city. When the city improves a facility or a piece of infrastructure where we can't identify the people specifically that are benefiting. What I mean by that is when you look at public facilities and infrastructure, road repaving and park improvements are eligible. So a city can improve the playground and the landscaping and whatever else at a playground, put in ball fields, picnic shelters, whatever. We're never going to be able to count the income of the people that are actually accessing the picnic shelter. Like we're not going to put somebody there asking
The
income.
LMI area is determined by the percentage of LMI
Right.
residents.
So in those cases, then we have to have it in a low to moderate income area. Now the city as a whole is more than 51% LMI, right? So some infrastructure and parks might actually serve everybody in the city, and in that case, the area benefit is acceptable. But I don't think none of our sub-recipients would use that national objective
From
area.
from the current awardees? How would you get it?
Other than the Parks Department, I don't think anybody at all. Okay? Yes, sir.
But doesn't the LMI benefit also apply to public services?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're gonna get to
So-
that as well.
So for services, not just a facility, if your service is in the city of Harrisburg, which is 51% LMI, why do you need to document the income?
Because you identify the people coming in to access the
Yeah, you
service.
can identify their address.
Right, so in that case, you have to, that's considered this limited clientele, and you have to confirm the LMI status.
So I mean, like if 51% of people I serve in my service are from Harrisburg, they're LMI, they're from Harrisburg.
Not necessarily. The area, there are only certain type of activities that get to use that national objective of low mod area. And that's why I said, the city's been asking your primary service area, and they shouldn't have been, because no application I reviewed could use that national objective of the low mod area. None of them. Only the ones I can think of is the parks. What does the redevelopment authority do that you would want to use area benefit?
Well, we've not constructed any, but I've seen community centers that would benefit a particular community. So
Yeah,
there's the
absolutely,
CDBG
community
funded.
center.
So, and maybe a health clinic, there's a new health clinic,
Yep.
or there's a playground that's part of a nonprofit.
So a
And
health
there's-
clinic is going to do intake and is going to ask the people for their income and their residence. So again, you're going to document individual participants. A park, you can't document individual participants. Street repaving, you can't document individual participants or users of the road. So if that's the case, then maybe LMA, low mod area is acceptable.
And it's the reason that we ask the questions, and I don't want to I want to respect the fact that your workshop is primary for recent awards, and you know what their application looks like, you know what they need to be.
But I also want to make sure that,
But it also, there's been a, HUD has published, and it's widely used, the area-wide, local low mod area benefit, it's widely used across the country. So I just thought
Absolutely.
some help with
And
us
it's-
to understand when that really does apply,
Right.
when it doesn't.
and when it really applies is when you can't document and can't count the people that are accessing that improvement.
A lot of our rule of thumb has been, if it can be very clearly demonstrated that that facility or that improvement benefits the immediate neighborhood and the census tracts, which are over 51% LMI, then it's a no-brainer. You can make the case for.
So a neighborhood park benefits a neighborhood, but a health clinic that's that intentionally is for low-income folks, so it's a free or reduced fee health clinic, you can't confirm that the service area is only one neighborhood, or even half the city, or even the whole city, right? Because they would, unless the door's shut for people from the county, right? And
We have some small instances of benefits.
okay, and then so in that case it might be, but again, you would be able to document the individual participants, and therefore HUD's guidance would be that that's the recommendation you should do, rather than the LMA. The LMA is widely overused, and I will tell you, HUD is cracking down on that, and certainly the Philly field office is cracking down on that. Let me go here.
So, we do serve like we have like South Alabama, we do beautification projects, which are certain,
Could you repeat the question?
Okay. So we do serve like South Allison Hill, which is obviously a documented low area income, and we are serving specific houses, but it's more about the general neighborhood, cleaning up the area, illegal dump sites, like things like that, that aren't, like, what I'm asking is like, would that qualify as this whole, when you guys are talking about the area benefit? Because it's not like, or would we have to go to every single house, like within 4 blocks, or how many blocks we're serving, and have every single person fill that out, even though it's more about the general area that's like.
So let me ask you a precursor question to that. What organization is doing this?
Wildfire, yeah,
Is that a 501c3?
yeah.
And so as a sub-recipient, then you could apply to improve an area, yes. So generally speaking, that might be one case where an area benefit would be the appropriate national objective.
You just referenced the previous applications, and I'm wondering what part of the application was this information collected in?
Unfortunately, it was not collected correctly, so you will see the next application is being completely overhauled. We will have an application workshop in the summer, and so what you filled out and submitted as application in the past is going to be scrapped, and we're starting over in the summer. Now, I mean, people that are funded, they're funded. That it is what it is, but that's part of why we're having this workshop. Before we get going down spending funds this cycle, we need to make sure everybody's on the same page and able to document. And again, when you apply for funds starting in October, we'll have a new application workshop where this will be made clear.
So that wasn't the criteria, part of the criteria for the last application? Because it
What do you
wasn't
mean
included.
part of the criteria?
The award criteria for the last application, because that wasn't included in the application.
I'm sorry, what wasn't included?
When you referenced the LMI, the self-reported income, and that wasn't, if it wasn't in the application, then it wouldn't have been part of the criteria for the award, right?
Part of what I would suggest is all of you that have had applied for CDBG funds, the regs are cited in the application, and the regs cite, and everybody that's had an agreement, quite frankly, the regs are cited in all of your agreements. Now here's the problem, and I'm going to just be blunt with the city, they know this. They've got a long list of audit findings from HUD, where they say they got all these agreements and contracts in place with you that are all citing the regs, but they're not enforcing them. So, I mean, here we are. We have to take a pause in the middle of the year and start enforcing them. So, yeah, I mean, you may absolutely be correct. Some of that stuff probably should have been explained in a workshop before you applied, certainly, so that everybody knew. But that's what we're trying to do today.
So, okay, so just, I can see the confused looks, I'm just trying to bring some clarity because I know that people are concerned, as you know, because there was this law in the application process, the last cycle, and I'm not sure if recipients have actually, if the city has actually informed the recipients of their funding levels. So that's right for the last round, okay. I'm looking around to see. So that's a question. I know that's not why you're here, but I think because of that, when you say they LMI was in the regs and they didn't follow the regs, are you talking about the city or are you talking about the HUD applicants or are you talking about?
All of them.
Okay.
I mean, over the last many years, the city has not enforced what they should have. And again, that's why we're having workshops, and we're going to have more workshops that are going to be mandatory so that everybody understands. And don't get me wrong, and I'm not trying to be negative here, but the city is at risk of paying back tens and thousands of dollars if we don't get this right. And quite frankly, millions of dollars if we don't get this right. And the city has had to repay funds multiple times in the last few years because things weren't properly documented. And the fact of the matter is that's got to stop. And we got to get it going right. And so you're absolutely right. We're in the middle of a cycle here. So awards have been recommended at least to council. I'm not exactly sure where the status is.
Because I can see everyone's looking at me. I don't know what the awards are though.
I'm a little confused too.
Okay.
I mean, are you
Everyone
saying,
received letters by now.
Okay.
okay, and there were some that were awarded and others that were rejected?
Correct.
Okay.
And you're gonna talk at all about the ESG rejection?
Not today. We can
Okay.
talk, you can always make an appointment with us and we can
Okay.
talk further, but this is just based on the application process and how to submit invoices and things like that, but not for what you want to talk about. No, we can make an appointment with Tasha and
money.
We understand why a lot showed up today, because they got those lemon changes 2 days ago.
Right.
So a handful of ESG
I
applicants.
understand that, that's why we're trying to fix the issue. This is why, right now, I understand everyone's frustration, but you have to understand ours. This is all new staff, and we're trying to make it right. We're following rules. And a lot of people don't understand why we're enforcing them, is because we're having to repay money back, because in the past, it was not done properly.
Excuse me, what's your name?
My name is Lily
Lily?
Williams.
I just like to point
Williams.
out, because we're, as a HUD agency, we do have to go through rigorous certification process and documentation and going through all kinds of files. And so I just want to reiterate that the information's available. Our clients fill out forms, everything approved by HUD. And so if it's asked, I'm sure that we have it, being that, HUD requires the same information. So I just want to make sure that that we're being asked, because we've been told not to provide more than what is asked for specifically. And so we haven't done that with applications. But we have tons of data on clients and that we could provide. And I want to make sure that it's not for, make sure it's understood that we're not providing, if we're not providing it, it's because we weren't asked, not because we don't have it or not.
I can't speak to applications that were funded or rejected. I mean, again, that's not necessarily the point today. But I don't think anybody's application was not funded because the application didn't ask something. They were not funded because of ineligibility one way or the other, right? And we're going to have another cycle here in just a few months where people, again, the application package and process will be redone so that it's very clear. And again, when I read the application, the first thing I said is this should be thrown out and you should reject all applications and start over. So the city didn't take my advice, because I was going to tell them to punt and try again, because all of it should be redone.
Well, they did.
Well, they did it twice that way.
And I said do it again, okay?
So, and that is the sort of the core of my issue, which is getting it right. And it is around transparency and clarity, and on the administrative side and the legislative side of the city, and whether or not, even with the letters that went out, there's understanding that process. I know this isn't out while you're here, but I don't want it to be the case that folks get these letters and then they're told, wait, it's not right again. And we have to go circle back around to the drawing board. So,
So let's get to the crux of the matter. Those of you that are about to sign agreements and have funds for this new year, this new cycle, before you draw any money on your program, before you ask the city to reimburse you for CDBG funds, we've got to make sure that everything is in order. And that's why Tasha will be visiting you every other week at the beginning to make sure that these new processes, these new forms are complete, and that you don't have delays in receiving your funds. Okay? The question for a lot of these is not whether organizations were doing good programs. That's not what's called into question, but documenting the eligibility, documenting who was benefited. I mean, I can talk to looking at files and I say, yeah, this is a great program, but you don't have the paperwork to confirm it, and the city didn't go out and monitor you enough to confirm that you had the paperwork. So you're exactly right, Beverly. You don't have to give all of the files for all of your clients to the city. But Tasha is going to come out this year and monitor you, and when you tell her that this month we serve 50 low-income residents of Harrisburg, you're just going to give her a summary report. She's going to go over that in a few minutes. But when she comes on site, she's going to show, Beverly, you said you served 50 people in March. Show me the files in your cabinet that document that, and that you have all the paperwork. And that's what we haven't been doing in the past as well, right? So that's the monitoring effort was not done in the past, so things there was just creeping away from being able to document.
Yeah, it was every other year.
And for right now, I mean, HUD's monitoring the city every 6 months, right? So we can't go every other year with the sub-recipients. That's just not going to happen. Okay? Yes, sir.
The beginning of the fiscal year, the last fiscal year, this fiscal year was October 1st. Now, whatever we submit for reimbursement in my case, it's capital, so obviously I haven't been allowed to do the project, so I won't be submitting anything until I get it, in flow. But presumably, to those organizations that have been providing service as of October 1st, would the reimbursement date be back to October 1st, or are you talking about when you get your act together going forward?
I'll defer to Lily. Have you seen the agreements? Does it allow back to October?
They are allowed back to October, yes.
Well, we've got to do an environmental review session.
Okay.
You say capital, what activity? What are you talking about?
This is the ADA compliance.
I can laugh about
Public
this.
facility.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't-
She said it was ADA compliance for a public facility.
Yes, that.
You've already made the physical improvements?
No, believe me, I've been
These
down
were
that road
pictures.
before.
All right, so
I wasn't spending a dime.
This is not part of the agenda, but for those of you that ask for money to fix your facility, or in the future will ask to fix a facility or make an improvement that is even remotely construction related. These are federal funds. The city must do what is referred to as an environmental review. This is not going out and testing soils and doing stuff, engineered level stuff. There's some paperwork the city's got to do to confirm that you're not going to have a negative impact on the environment. That has to be completed and approved by HUD before you start your construction. Right? So when you get your agreement, they get funded? So when you get, sorry, I didn't know.
It's all right. No,
But when you get
I'm
your
laughing
agreement
about it.
in the next month or weeks or whatever it is, that agreement is going to tell you that you can't start until that environmental review is signed off. It cites the regs. I've
That's what
seen
I
the
wanna
agreements.
understand.
It all cites that reg.
Yeah.
And in the past, staff has not coordinated enough closely with sub-recipients to say, hey, please don't do this until we finish the environmental review. So it'll take 2 weeks. People start construction, now it's ineligible, right? So, but that's been in the contract. I've looked at the contracts going back for years, and it's been in every one of them. Yet it wasn't enforced.
Absolutely, if I may, it has, I know what it says, but I also know that it is a situation where you have recipients. First of all, I'm glad there's a new team in place. So this is no harm, no foul, okay, going forward, okay, on the one hand. Okay, on the other hand, it is that there is an education process around those kinds of situations because there is a pattern and practice in place that is that deviates from what you just said.
Which is why Tasha will be with you every 2 weeks going forward so that we don't deviate.
But I am reinforcing what you're saying because it's very important. All right?
Thank you. And again, we will have another workshop for next application cycle that will go over eligibility. There will be a new application which will be, quite frankly, will be simpler to complete. I don't need you to fill out pages and pages and pages and select the national objective. Just tell me that you serve seniors or that you served victims of domestic violence or you serve low-income people or it's a free or reduced clinic. Like, I don't need all that other stuff because, quite frankly, a lot of people didn't know which was the right answer or picked multiple ones and it was not the appropriate education. So the application will be streamlined so that you tell us what you're doing, we'll tell you if it's eligible. And you'll show up to the workshop, you'll get to see me again, and I will help you confirm that it was eligible before you spend your time with the application.
So you're telling me the matrix will be gone?
Yep. It's right here, and I'm going to teach it to you at the workshop.
We'll take that up offline, thanks.
Ma'am?
Two questions. So is this the code 24 CFR Part 5?
Yes and no. So this is a good question. So what agency are you with? I'm sorry.
Latino Hispanic American Community
Okay.
Center.
So she asked about she showed the income certification or the income spreadsheet and asked about Part 5. Can you tell us what Part 5 is?
I don't have it right.
But what does that mean? Do you know what Part 5 means? Okay, so if you're, so Dave runs and Linda run an owner-occupied housing rehab program. The city puts some of these CDBG funds to rehab individual households, repair their house. That is considered a direct benefit. Unfortunately, the form cited in all y'all's agreement says direct benefit form has to be completed. Well, that's the wrong form. Okay, it is what it is. The reg benefit is for the Smiths are getting a new roof on their house, and they're going to get $25,000 of direct assistance to fix their house, which they will own. In that case, the city then has to do what is referred to as Part 5 income certification. This form is not sufficient for that level of assistance. The city then has to ask those folks for pay stubs and bank statements and savings account statements to actually confirm their income is what they say it is. Because you are serving hundreds or thousands of people in a broadly a service, not an individualized program, then you don't have to do Part 5. You just have to do the self-certification. There's a little statement on the back of this self-certification that says, hey, warning, it's a felony to sign it and do this incorrectly. They sign it, they're willing to sign it, then we'll take them at their word.
Second question.
So you don't have to do Part 5 for a public service or a public facility.
So second question, so you have hypothetically a youth program. So I see that signature is the head of household.
Mm-hmm.
So that particular kid, their parents, they need to sign, correct?
Correct. Correct. So HUD says youth don't have incomes. They're from households that have an income or zero income. In any case, their parent or their legal guardian is filling out the form as head of household and legal guardian of the youth.
And that list, there's room for a lot of adults listed on the back.
Yeah, that's a little bit overkill, but this is HUD specific form. So, and again, it's per household. So everybody 18 or older living in that household, that I agree with you, that's a lot more than would be normal. But I suppose you could have mom and dad and a couple grandparents and an uncle or something, but there's like 10. I agree. But this is off the HUD Exchange. We literally printed this form off the HUD Exchange this morning and made no modifications. Okay. Questions on documenting eligibility and participation? So I don't necessarily need to read to you the public services, but many of you are providing services, and so I'd encourage you to read through here and document what is eligible versus what's ineligible, and learn about public services. If you feel like you're going to apply for funds in the next cycle under the service category, I'd encourage you to be familiar with this going into and have a game plan of what you're going to apply for. Questions? All right, last form. This one has the city's logo, or the building and housing department's logo at the top. And this is your quarterly progress report. So you'll be submitting these to Tasha. Everybody see this? Sorry. So you'll be submitting these electronically to Tasha. We've simplified this. For those of you that have been doing this in the past, until this morning this was 5 or 6 pages long. We simplified it and took out many of the narratives that were unnecessary or duplicative. So you see, you're going to submit, whether you're CDBG or ESG, you're submitting this report each quarter. And you're just summarizing the program's progress thus far and who's benefited. And you see on the second page, HUD requires us to have the race, ethnicity, and income of your participants. We're going to track this quarterly, and then at the end of the year, you're going to give us an annual summary, which is what we report to HUD. Okay, fairly straightforward. The due dates are on that third page, and then whoever is filling it out for your organization signs and submits. So this is all we need. Again, back to Beverly's question a little while ago. You're going to have in-house these self-certification forms for all of your participants. Whatever your program is, you're going to have these self-certifications in your files. And you're going to summarize each quarter on this report that gets submitted to staff. When Tasha comes out to you after the first quarter, she's going to come out with this form. And whatever it says on this form that you guys signed and submitted, she's going to ask you to show her the file cabinet that has all of this information and confirm. That's what monitoring is, amongst other things. Okay,
These quarters are different.
these quarters need to be updated.
2019.
Well, it starts,
It's actually
It's from the program.
year, not a fiscal year. So the HUD program year runs from October 1st to September 30th of the following year.
right,
It's
the
a little-
program
it's-
year starts October 1st.
Yeah, it's a little off, yeah.
Yeah,
This
It's
is
from
showing from July 1st, that's
Okay.
the first quarter.
Nonetheless, the quarters, whether it's first, second, third, or fourth, the quarter, it's due 15 days after the quarter's over.
Okay, so you're not changing when the year starts, it's just, these
That's-
can be redone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
They're-
She'll bring new ones out.
But you're correct. The first quarter, if you will, on a normal year would be October 1st through December 31st,
okay.
right? That's the program year. So it is a little bit off, but nonetheless, the quarters are what the quarters are, and the due date will be the same. Okay? So again, just to summarize here, most everybody in the room has asked for on CDBG side, services or facilities. There's some ESG participants in here. Yours is a little easier. You're documenting homelessness or the at risk of becoming homeless when you're doing prevention and rapid rehousing. You've got your same beneficiary forms, and then we know we're working with you guys to get your reports out of HMIS at the end of the year. So that process is a little easier, but again, through your intake process, you're documenting the eligibility for the ESG programs. That was the hard part here on CDBG. So at the end of the day, for you guys that are doing ESG, you're entering those beneficiaries or those clients in HMIS, which at the end of the year, through our SAGE reports, you're submitting to us. Right? Good on that? You were ESG, and you guys do HMIS. Was anybody else ESG? And you're good? You that questions on that? Make sense? Sir?
The 15% cap on
Public service. That applies to the city.
That applies to the city. And
So the city receives, in 2020 is going to receive just over $1 million in CDBG funds. So they're capped at public services at 15%. Now, I'll be honest with you, many cities don't allow for outside agencies to apply for facility money because a lot of other stuff starts getting triggered, environmental review and Davis-Bacon. It's difficult to maintain compliance on construction type stuff. So a lot of jurisdictions don't put out facility money. Harrisburg actually encourages you to apply for facility improvements so that we don't have everybody oversubscribing to the little 15% of public service. Right? 15% of $1 million, it doesn't go far when you got dozens of organizations requesting funding.
And with the city of Harrisburg, that David Dodd penalty is still in effect. That's probably not a question you can answer, but we're still.
What is that?
It's a city loan that the city has out. We paid off one, but yes, that is.
It's a pay down for a facility that one of us did went into
Oh, one of them,
insolvency.
Yeah, we're not
And,
going to-
yeah, so.
Yeah, that's not impacting our ability to fund anybody now.
I have a question about
Check that out.
service
Go
and
ahead.
facilities, that duality there, you talked about those two funding streams. At the last meeting we had, the one, at least the last meeting that I attended, which was over at the maintenance facility, and it was a big one, so that would have been like October, maybe November of last year. The person who was then in charge talked about there being an opportunity to submit, and she encouraged applicants to submit applications in both funding categories. Can you talk about that as a protocol and whether or not the city of Harrisburg has in fact funded entities for both services and facilities, and the prevalence of that? And also, and then finally, I'd like to talk about how the sort of the oversight of city council in relation to it. I know that that's maybe outside of your, but there is a city council member here, so, okay.
So on the public facility and services, as far as I know, there was no, certainly was no prohibition, if you will, nothing prohibiting you from applying for number one, you could apply for ESG and CDBG funds. Now ESG, we haven't gone into a lot of detail. There's only a few service providers for that typically. That's for homeless or folks at risk of becoming homeless. It's very specific, and CDBG is way more flexible and broad on what we can do. But number one, you could apply for CDBG and ESG, right? The Y, for example, could apply for CDBG funds to fix the facility and ESG funds to provide services within that facility for those people that are eligible for ESG services. So you could do that, but yeah, you could also then, and I don't think we would have any change to this in the future, you could apply for service under CDBG and facility. Right, so the difference on, again, I would encourage you to read the chapter if you've got funding or considering funding. But a facility, what we would be looking for there realistically is to improve the facility. So we'd be looking to do some type of probably a light construction type project. ADA bathroom improvements at the senior center, for example. You might need your parking lot repaved. You might need a new roof. You might need a new furnace. You might just need to paint the building or redo some floors. Those kinds of things is probably what the city would encourage you to do under facilities. I'll be honest, acquiring and building a new facility from scratch is eligible, but I don't think the city's going to be able to foot that bill with just $1 million to go across all programs. So we're probably looking for what's realistic, if you will, is a light construction, a modification, a rehabilitation of your facility to keep it operable.
And Davis-Bacon, the implications of that, I mean, I don't know, I can't remember what the threshold is, Gary will know,
Well,
you will know. Is it 35? I mean, it may be,
For CDBG, it's construction.
Oh, okay.
$1,000. So
That's
yeah, the
important.
city's not going to fund anything less than $1,000. So yeah, Davis-Bacon on repairing some bathrooms or even painting the bathrooms would trigger. And for those of you who are not familiar with Davis-Bacon, again, that's a different workshop, but that's late wage compliance. And you have to get weekly payroll from the contractors that are working on the job. Again, I'll cite that this is all in your contracts, right? Construction, environmental review, procurement, Davis-Bacon, labor, all of that is in your contracts. Admittedly, the city has not done enough training up front, but moving forward, if you've got a contract for a facility improvement, staff is going to be holding your hand to make sure that that is done correctly before you get to a point that renders the activity ineligible and says, we can't repay you, and we're not going to be able to use CDBG funds, right? So before you start rehabbing those bathrooms, city's going to do the environmental review, going to get with you on procurement, going to get with you on Davis-Bacon, those kind of things. Before you start spending any money, you get us to a point where you started too quick, we didn't do all the paperwork. Again, it's federal funds, and I don't think there's not a program dealing with the federal government that anybody would call simple. We've perhaps made it simple by ignoring some of it, but that didn't mean it went away. And so we're correcting that. Yes, sir.
I guess I misunderstood. I thought this session would include home funding. Will you be doing a separate workshop on that? I happen to represent the city's community housing development organization. We work not only in the city, but we hold that designation in Dauphin County, Cumberland County, Carlisle Borough. Will there be a workshop?
There will be a specific separate home workshop dedicated to only housing development. Yes, sir.
And relative to that, I echo Sheila's comments. I think many of us are excited that there's a staff in place, and we hope that it remains the same staff and stability occurs and things are done the right way. But can you discuss a little bit about what is appropriate communication to sub-recipients? Again, I deal in a number of jurisdictions, and I'm not familiar with Facebook being an appropriate facet of communication for a public, for an RFP on something like that. Can you speak to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I'm a consultant for the city, so I can't speak to what the city deems.
Is that an appropriate, is that acceptable by HUD, a way to communicate with folks?
Well, what I would say is, number one.
I'm just trying to.
No, it's okay.
I don't have a Facebook account. My wife handles the Facebook.
Yeah, and I'm not friends with the city on Facebook either. I mean, that's my grandma and my aunt. That's it. So, no. First, let me share, again, let's just talk a little bit of education on this. The city is not required to put out one single penny of this to anybody. Right? The city is allowed to do all of these programs, except for the 15% that has to go to Chodos, in-house. So the city putting out public service is something that is not required at all. Public facilities for outside agencies, and even ESG. Now the city probably doesn't have the capacity to do ESG, but in New Jersey, all of the municipalities that receive ESG deliver those services directly. So first, I'll just say that this workshop and application workshops and all of that effort is not required by HUD. When you read basically CDBG Chapter 1, if you want to find that on the HUD Exchange, it frankly tells you that, and I'll say this with everybody in the room, the mayor could just decide he's going to fund this, this, and this, and that's it. That is acceptable by HUD. So there doesn't have to be any communication with subrecipients because there doesn't have to be any subrecipients. Now I agree, if you're going to go through the process of having applications and having subrecipients, yeah, Facebook's probably not the way that you communicate that.
That's one of the ways we do separate.
Okay? But if it's mailers, if it's advertisements on the city website, if it's email and it's Facebook and it's Twitter and all of that, and it's just one piece of it, then yeah, I would say that that's acceptable. Not as the only way to publish an RFP for funds, certainly not.
We understand the transition, there's changes, but I think some of us will fall off guard by not having had direct contact via mail or email
On
applications. You know, there never was, some of us never had the opportunity to submit for home dollars last year. We were told last October at the workshop that you referred to from the previous acting director that that would be provided. It was never provided to us.
Was there a home application?
No, there was
Never
not.
was.
There never was, okay.
At
No,
least
there was
that I'm aware of.
So I will also tell you that I've only been on with the city for a few months. One of the things I pointed out to them is that they're often been in too much of a rush to get these funds out. Now I realize you guys are used to receiving funds every year and having an annual cycle. But the city has 9 years to spend these funds. So HUD just announced the allocation for 2020. They have till 2029 to spend all of the home dollars that were just allocated. So the idea that all of these things get rushed into a 3-month little cycle and we do this so quickly with one little workshop or one little form that gets filled out, that's not going to be sufficient to get this train going the right way, so to speak. So some of the things needed to be slowed down. Again, I'm not sure if you were in the room. I suggested that CDBG and ESG applications should all be thrown out and start over with a more appropriate application. Okay? So I thought that all of it should have been slower. But again, there's organizations that are relying on these funds. The city has to answer to that, so the city went ahead with the applications. But we've got to get it right from the date the contract is signed. Now, home's coming up quick. But again, the city doesn't have to put out applications for home. So if there are good organizations, and I know there are, in the community doing housing, the city can just have a meeting with you directly to talk about what your plans are. And I feel like that happened recently with your organization, right?
Oh, yes, we just.
Yeah. Right. So not all of these necessarily is it appropriate to pull out full-scale applications for everything. I mean, some of it can be done different methods.
What would the city report to HUD or whomever if they don't have the program information? Like if they didn't give out the money to subrecipients, so what would they report to HUD for?
That based on the long list of findings that the city has received over the last few years, the city took the appropriate time to re-implement or re-establish program policies and procedures, application processes, and will be funding applications upcoming. And there are grantees across the country that have to do that.
But what I'm saying is...
So you would tell HUD, because we've been messing this up for so long, we took a pause so that we could get it right rather than continuing.
But let's
There's
say,
no punitive damage to
right,
that.
but let's say the mayor, just hypothetically, decided that he wanted to use the funds at his discretion. Then what, so instead of using the statistics
And don't get me wrong, I don't think the mayor's, there's no question about that being an option, but
hypothetically, what would this, instead of having the agencies report to you, to the city, and the city report to HUD, what would the city report to HUD then?
Well, the city would presumably be doing the activities themselves.
Okay, so the city.
Right, again, it's $1 million. I mean, the city's got parks that need millions of dollars. I assume the capital improvement plan for the city's park department could use $1 million for the next 20 years and still have a long list of improvements, right? I mean, so, you know, just rehabbing one gymnasium at I think there's 2 parks that have big pools. I mean, like, I'm sure that there's $1 million needs for just one of those. And it, hypothetically,
Yeah,
it would be acceptable for the city to say, we want to fix this park once and for all. We're going to put $1 million for 2020 and fix this park so that it is spick and span ready for the public to fully use.
And in
that'd
other
be
cities,
sufficient.
in other cities, the city performs the functions that these smaller agencies perform, and they,
Correct.
and they, so they would have to have the, you know, they would be doing the refugee resettlement and the, so they would have these things for that similar amount of grant money. They would perform those activities, and then they would use that, report that back to HUD. That's how it works other places?
Well, so, and forgive me, we're going way down a bunch of side notes here that weren't intended. But let's back it up. Every 5 years, the city does a consolidated plan. How many of you participated in the consolidated plan last time? Okay, a few of you. Well, what the purpose of that consolidated plan was to do was to identify the priorities for how the city would use the funding it receives from CDBG, Home, and ESG. And they also received this Hopwood grant, but then they partner with the state to administer that on their behalf. So there's 3 grants that roughly $2 million altogether. So over 5 years, you're talking $10 million. The purpose of that consolidated plan was for the city and its constituents to establish the priorities.
Are we in the first year now of the new 5-year cycle? Is that true? Okay.
Well, one of our, to answer your question, we are, but HUD only approved that comp plan so that we could keep spending money. One of our findings says we've got to redo the comp plan because it wasn't done sufficiently. Okay, now staff and the consultant that were doing that have been let go, and myself and staff will be doing it correctly, and hopefully you will participate when we do that. But the point of the consolidated plan is to establish the priorities. So in other jurisdictions, parks are the priority for CDBG. That's it. They're going to fix parks. Okay, I live in South Carolina. The state only uses CDBG funds only to fix infrastructure. They do water and sewer around the state. That's it. They don't do any services. They don't do any housing. They don't do any elderly programs with the funds. That's the state's priority. Harrisburg has essentially said we don't have any priorities. Everything that's eligible we're willing to do. Which is part of the reason the HUD's wanting us to fix the plan. So when you ask, well, do other jurisdictions then do all of these services on their own? No, they don't. But they prioritize other things. So the city, again, has allowed for, through its process, to allow for agencies to apply for essentially everything that's eligible. And that's, quite frankly, with just over $1 million, it's just not feasible. And that's part of why I've had so much trouble with HUD in the past. Everything is eligible. There's no priorities. We can't get a good handle on anything and do anything really well if that's the case.
Now, as for the comprehensive plan, that's a whole other ball of wax. My organization gave the city money to develop a comprehensive plan.
The comprehensive plan is different.
Okay. But
The planning department does comprehensive plan. This is a consolidated plan,
I'm
just
sorry,
for HUD.
I did go right down that pathway, didn't I? Consolidated plan, but I won't talk about the comprehensive plan. But the reality is that this goes to, I would say, transparency and communication, once again. And really, letting the entities that are a part of making the city a cohesive whole, engaging them in a way that is meaningful. And this is the chance for the city to get this right. I'm not trying to be a lecturer. It is the chance, though. It has been an incredible ball of confusion to quote the Temptations, if I may, from 1974, 75, but just a ball of confusion. And we we need to get better at this as a city, and the grant recipients are there. You know, the oversight is absolutely critical. But it is also the fact that there needs to be value placed on those who are doing the work, you know. So that's what I'll say. And maybe it will be fewer, like when they were building the substation, they took, the city held on to a lot of the HUD funding and said we're going to designate that. So that's not something that is, it wasn't all of it, but it was a significant amount. It is really kind of threading that needle is very hard because of the resource limitations, so.
And to the resource limitations, again, 15% of $1 million, roughly 100, it's a little bit more than $1 million. So let's call it 175,000 is the max for public service in any given year. Now, again, public facility hypothetically doesn't have a limit, but even still, if we put all of the rest of the money, now you're talking about 800, 825. Like, I mean, that's just not a lot of money for anyone. So again, that consolidated planning process, we're going to have to go back through it and reestablish that. But again, as we talk about getting this going correctly, the city values, obviously, the sub-recipients. Because, again, third party, I live in South Carolina, you can hate me when you leave, but I told them to stop. I looked at the application and I said, the form is bad. Throw this out. I didn't say the applications were bad. You responded to what you were given. But I said, the form is bad. Throw it out and let's do this thing over. Well, we already delayed since October. We got to get the funds deployed, so we're going to stick with it. So, all right, here we are, okay? But I will tell you that I have been working with staff for many months now, doing training for staff and getting new forms, new documents. I mean, simple things like this. Those of you that know this quarterly report, it was 5 pages long. It had a whole bunch of redundant stuff that was not necessary. Can we get rid of that junk, right? Let's streamline this and not waste your time communicating on a 5-page quarterly report that we didn't need in the first place. Let's get to the point, and more importantly, let's have Tasha get to know you guys by coming out every couple weeks. And don't take that as the wrong way. Tasha doesn't know your organizations, and to your point, the city hasn't developed or maintained the relationships with you. So it's not about coming to find things where you're going to be wrong. It's about Tasha needs to learn you guys and get to know you guys and know what you do and who you serve so that there can be a relationship again. And so I think that's the point we're on. None of this is punitive. So, I mean, I'm very matter of the fact here, but don't take this as like you're doing it wrong, because I'll point at them first. They were doing it wrong. They know this, and we're getting it right. So now we're going to try to rebuild that relationship, reestablish. So once you get these agreements in place moving forward, Tasha's going to be meeting with you multiple times a month so we all get comfortable. And then quarterly or every 6 months. And to maintain compliance with HUD requirements, she's going to do a monitoring. It's going to be very formal. She's going to send you a letter out, say, I'm coming to monitor you. And I want to point you to, we had this ready and we're not going to have time to go through it. But if you Google CPD monitoring handbook or just HUD monitoring handbook, this goes on for many, many pages. But CDBG, home, and ESG, the tools that HUD uses to monitor the city are all listed here. And what the HUD is required to do is when they come monitor the city in June, they tell HUD, or they tell the city, we're going to use monitoring exhibit, and you'll see they're all numbered down here. We're going to use 3-9. Well, Tasha's going to do the same thing when she comes to monitor you later in the year. She's going to say, I'm coming to monitor for a certain topic, and I'm going to use a certain exhibit, and she'll point you to where you can find that exhibit so you can prepare for that monitoring. But that's required by HUD that she monitors you. So don't take that again as a punitive function. We need to be doing that so that we can catch things before HUD catches us and says, repay $50,000. We'd rather catch it, hey, we need to fix this, and then I'll come back in 2 weeks and see that you've got it right, and now we're clean when HUD comes in. Okay? Yes, ma'am?
Okay, so returning back to this report, can you walk me through the report? Because I see some shadows, lines, and I see some bolts. So that means that are new, the multiracial American Indian, the single parent head of household, the person with disabilities. And then I just wanted to know if the male and female is the summary of all these categories.
So if you'll go to the quarterly report, and I'm going to look at page 2, the demographic page. And we modified this morning. For those of you that have seen it before, it used to go on to another page by itself. When we report to HUD, we have to report 3 things about every household for these programs we're talking about. The income, first off, and let me back up. I'm assuming that they're Harrisburg, right? So Harrisburg is number 1. Then the income, and then the race and ethnicity. So in the past, we had Hispanic down below, and then all of the races. Well, you can be white Hispanic or black Hispanic. I suppose I know someone that was Asian Hispanic. That's possible, right? But we used to have Hispanic as this like other category altogether. So we made it Hispanic or not for all of your race, right? So for example, I was using Beverly's as an example. Let's say she served 50 people in the quarter. She served 50 white, of which 40 were Hispanic and 10 were not. And you could go down for any of those races. So the reason it's blacked out in those above and beyond is because we just need Hispanic by race. That's it. So you're going to tell me, let's start at the top, the income range. So there's 3 income ranges that are possible. Extremely low, very low, moderate, or there's people that are above income. Well, no, they're not beneficiaries of the low to moderate income program, right? So let's say, again, 50 people. I need to show the income ranges for the 50 households. So I might have 10, 10, 30. My income and then my race need to be the same number. I have 50 people. I need their incomes and the race and ethnicity for the 50 households.
Okay, so that was my question. So the gray area means that you can still put information no matter.
You don't need, the gray is blocked out. You don't put anything there.
Okay.
So then down at the bottom, single parent household. You might have male or female single head of household, but obviously it would only be up to the total people household served, right? You served 50 households. How many of them were single head of household? Single male or single female? Right? You make sense?
Okay,
so you have 50
male,
moderate
female?
income,
Yes.
you have 50 white Hispanic, and you have 20 female head of household. All of that jives. I could not have 60 female head of household if I only served 50 people in the first place. Okay.
So we still fill this, even if it's.
You fill out the race, and then the totals, and then you keep cumulative going each year.
And what about the incomes if it's like locked?
It's right here.
Right.
Total number of people this quarter for income.
Oh, so you're right. Okay.
To the right.
Here. And then here. Gotcha.
I agree. It's not the most well organized, but this was the adaptation we could do without just overhauling and scrapping the whole thing. So we try to keep it a little bit consistent. This looks familiar, but I agree. It's not the best structure. Next year it'll be a whole different form.
The new categories, I suppose, is person with disabilities, single parent head of household, and multiracial. Are those new, right?
They were there before.
Yes.
Yeah, they were just on another page because there was so much other stuff on it. Any questions on that? Again, the part of the reason you do this quarterly is Tasha's actually going to be looking at it. So if the math isn't right, Tasha's going to say, she's going to call you up, hey, here's why this isn't correct. I need the numbers to be the same.
I need to know how to read this to fill, potentially the information.
Yep, so the grayed out cells you don't fill in.
Okay.
All right, next, wherever it says extremely low, 0.30, that number goes over here.
Correct.
We don't fill any.
Correct. We inserted these 2 columns for Hispanic, non-Hispanic, instead of having the whole table duplicated for Hispanics down below, because that was not correct either. If we can't get this right, then maybe we change this form midstream, but we tried to make a simple modification. I promise you, starting next year, that there will be a different form altogether. Yes, sir?
Quick question. You mentioned public facilities, you mentioned parking lot, which happens to be something that's come up in my discussions. the amount of, I've been allocated won't come close to doing what needs to be done. So I'm asking this question while everybody's in the room, if there is another eligible capital project that more efficiently and effectively reflects the allocation amount, is my organization allowed to make that modification now so that we don't get dinged later?
I would say no. You applied for something specific, so you gotta stick with it. But here,
Let
let me agree with you though. Here's one of the reasons I said the application should be tossed out. Because number one, it didn't tell you how much money they were putting out for public facilities for outside agencies. It didn't put a limit on that. So if they said we're putting out 200,000, well, you know you can't ask for 300 because it's only going to put 2. And in a workshop, we could have said, hey, we're looking for jobs that are 25,000 or less, and we're looking for you to provide 50% of the funds from somewhere else. It was asked for the leverage and it was asked for the budget, but there was no scoring criteria to indicate to you that a preference will be provided to organizations that have 50% of the funds coming from elsewhere. Right? Like that stuff wasn't in the application. So next year what you'll see is when you ask for public facilities, we're going to tell you how much is being allocated. We're going to tell you the preferred scope of work, size-wise. And then there will be a scoring rubric, points given for each category. And in those points given, how much funds you leverage or provide from other sources will be very important on this, right? So you need a $100,000 job, we're only going to give you 25. Well, I mean, that would be clear to you up front. And if you have the 75, then you apply. If you don't. But those kinds of things weren't in the application.
I've got a couple of small projects that I can do with the amount that you allocated. If you're going to lock me into doing a parking lot, first of all, I step right into that environmental study and the environmental impact scenario.
Well, it doesn't matter whether you do the pavement or you do a bathroom door, it's the same thing. The environmental review's got to be
You're
done.
missing my point. An environmental review for a door on a bathroom takes 5 minutes.
No, sir, it doesn't. Not from HUD's perspective. I'm telling you, I mean, my firm does them for the city. It's construction or it's not construction. So it's a service or it's construction. That's it.
I'm with the construction.
So, but the HUD's environmental review is not like what you're thinking of an engineer going out there and assessing the site. That's not what we're talking about. I'm going to say your parking lot's been paved for 50 years and repaving it is going to have no further impact on the environment. Likewise, the facility's been there for 50 years, so fixing a bathroom door is no further impact. So that level of review is going to be absolutely the same. So I would just say, don't get bent up on the environmental review. It's not going to have an impact on your project.
Okay, I'm not getting hung up on the environmental review. I'm talking about the amount. I can get a bathroom done for the amount. I cannot get a parking lot done for the amount.
Sure.
So
What's your question?
The question is, do I have to go back out with another set of proposals to leverage additional funds, et cetera, which could take another 6 months?
I would say prep for the next application cycle for a project.
So leave my current allocation sitting in the pot with HUD, trust them.
Didn't he ask for bathroom repair?
Yes.
And he got awarded for bathroom repair. So use your current allocation to fix the bathroom. But if you've got a larger scale project in mind, be ready for that in the next cycle. But get other sources of funds ready.
Okay, so you help me out. You guys you're familiar with the bathroom. Okay, good.
Well, I'm familiar with the bathroom. I read that application too.
Okay, good. I'm good.
Okay.
I've got what I hope isn't a stupid question about the program year. So,
Not stupid.
the program year starts in October. You know, we've only just got our letters now. We're way past October. The funding is for 12 months from when we sign our contract, or is it till the end of the HUD program
You're
year?
going to allow services to go back. So for services, the contract, just like what HUD does for the city, will be dated today, but it allows you the authority to go back and be recovered
It's a brand
expenses
new
from October.
But it's a brand new service, so it isn't in place yet. That was one of
Yes.
the things I
So
was-
if it's not in place yet, and this is another change, the city's contracts are now going to be for 24 months. Everybody kept asking for extensions. Again, as I mentioned, they got 9 years to spend the money. Why are we putting 12-month contracts on? It doesn't make any sense. So your contract would be for 24 months.
Okay.
So yes, you'll have plenty of time.
All right.
Now, I'll give you the heads up. Somebody is asking for a bathroom. You're going to get a 24-month contract. You're going to have to be on track with your existing contract to apply for funds in the next cycle. And if you're not on track with your spending per your agreement, then you're not going to be eligible to apply for yet more funds. But if you knock out that bathroom in 2 months and you've spent down your contract, well, that contract will be closed and you'll be ready to apply for the next cycle. Okay? But the 24-month cycle should allow people a little more flexibility in their expenditures, a little bit more time to deliver, whether it's an improvement or a service. And then when the next cycle comes around, maybe you don't need to apply because you still got an open contract with balance. It's okay. Okay? Again, that part will be reviewed in our application workshop later this summer for the next cycle.
When does the next cycle actually start?
Well, the next round of funds will be available to the city starting in October.
October 1st to September 1st.
So we're going to have a new application cycle this summer.
In the summer. That's not, because like last year it was about this time. So everything's starting in the summer. Do you guys have like a date or?
Not yet. You will be made aware. There'll be another workshop, hopefully, and I'm just saying this to piss them off, hopefully in a room that's a little cooler.
So where we traditionally had this time of year, we would have been submitting applications
Right.
in March. That's not happening anymore.
No,
Okay.
it's not mandatory. That was just what the city was doing.
Yeah, right. So, but we won't expect that moving forward. Okay.
Correct. Okay. Any other questions for me before I have Tasha tell you how you can get your money for the invoice package? This is really what you wanted to hear at the end of the day, right? Just tell us how we get the money, for crying out loud. Okay. So again, I'll just summarize and then turn it over to Tasha to close out with the invoicing package. High level here on CDBG or ESG. If you're not intimately familiar with the HUD requirements, please go to the HUD Exchange, Google HUD Exchange, or if you're really just doing CDBG, the bottom of this chapter or of each of these pages, the manual is basically CDBG, very reader friendly. Read about it, right? There's a chapter on neighborhood improvements, right? So I would encourage you to read that chapter before you apply so that you know you write to what's eligible next time you apply. Okay? So be very familiar with the programs. Also, if you read about some of the stuff that's really terribly boring, about labor compliance, about environmental review, financial management stuff, all of that stuff is cited in your agreements. All these regulations are cited at the end of each paragraph. You can find all those answers and guidance on all of that on the HUD Exchange. So I encourage everybody to become familiar with that. I mean, we're going to have workshops. We're going to try to get more information out there. But I mean, this stuff takes years for practitioners to be familiar with. You've got to at least be familiar with the term, right? Gentleman in the back knows I'm doing construction. That triggers Davis-Bacon, which is labor compliance. I don't know how to do that, but I can find the answers up here. Okay, so please, please help us out by being familiar with the regulations that you're signing an agreement to abide by. That would be the first step for all of us, and that's the training that staff is getting right now as well, quite frankly. Okay, so I thank you for attending. I'm going to shut up. I will see you this summer for another application workshop, and I will turn it over to Tasha for invoicing practice.
Thank you, Mary. You provided amazing information. So my portion's very short. So all you're going to have to do, and don't worry, I will email you out examples of exactly what we require. So what you're going to do is provide me with an Excel spreadsheet of all of your allowable expenses. And then you're going to also provide me the backup information. So you're going to provide me with invoices that you've already paid, and we will reimburse you.
Everybody's familiar with that process already, right? Everybody knows that this is reimbursable.
There's some new people, don't worry, you're going to get to know me. So I will walk you through that process when I say, hey, I will be in contact with you every 2 weeks until you're really familiar with it and that I'm sure you have a grasp of what we're asking you to do. So I will come out and we can do the first invoice together. So you'll list all of your expenses, and then you'll provide all of your receipts. And then we will review it internally to make sure that those expenses are allowable. If something's, if something is not allowed, if we cannot reimburse you for that, I will contact you and say, this is why we cannot reimburse you for these amount of funds that you've already spent. And then we will, pay you. So the city pays every two weeks. And so I will share the payment cycle with you, so you're not waiting for a full month to get your payments. So you'll be waiting for a period of up to 30 days, but hopefully less than. And so we will be in constant contact. You can call me every day, or email me, or I'll even provide you my phone number so you can text me. So it's something that I'm really open to being transparent and communicating with everybody. And I might take a little while to get to you because I'm out in the field, but you'll have my phone number. Text me. I'll get back to you quicker. But so then you'll email that invoice to myself and to Linda. And don't worry, that will be in the sample that I provide you with our email addresses. And after this event, I will be emailing you all the recording that we have. And then I will also be sending out all of this documentation with a little bit more detail.
Is the spreadsheet the only part that's new? Or, because it used to just be, 3 copies and...
Now you're just going to email it to me. So I just want an invoice to make sure that your receipts your documentation is accurate. I will read every single receipt, every single line item. So it needs to be clear, and that invoice at the top is saying, this is how much money that I'm requesting. And you should be keeping a line item for yourself to know how much you have left in your funds to draw down. So I'm going to be comparing that with what you actually have available to draw on and what you actually have spent. So the invoice, the spreadsheet is just to make sure that we are on the same record, that we're on the same page.
And the spreadsheet will also help us, because Excel does calculations, it'll help us to make sure that the amount is correct.
Mm-hmm. Did you two have a question?
No.
Okay.
In terms of documentation for like salary and benefits, is that just information, if we put that information on the spreadsheet, or is there additional?
You would put that, and then you would send me your payroll report.
Okay.
And if it's, like, I'm used to payday. So like payday separates it for everybody. So you would hopefully be classifying it for just the funds based on what you're awarded. So you would separate, that portion of the grant, their funds, their salaries from that page. And so just that amount that's paid out. Oh, or timesheets. With timesheets to then further document what they use their time to do.
So the timesheet would require, it's not just hours, it's broken down into, okay.
Yeah.
And this would just be scanned and attached to the email?
Yes.
And the timesheet would document that one of your housing counselors offered 3 hours of fair housing counseling on these dates or these evenings or whatever, and then you're going to have the beneficiary information later on that says who attended those training sessions, right? So the timesheet needs to document the eligible activity that the individual was performing, right? And that doesn't necessarily have to be somebody in direct service, right? I mean, some supportive services or supportive staff are eligible for these overall assistance in delivering the program, right? So it might be your accountant spent 2 hours documenting the counselor's time in payroll. Those kinds of things are eligible, but we need to be clear to that. Okay.
It's like, many years ago, the city, I can't remember the name of who was running the office then, but this was the kind of thing that we had to do. We had to break down, what topics were covered during specific times. So it's kind of a throwback.
Was it
Good.
Jack?
No,
Who's Lord?
no, Christie, she had two last names. Christie.
It's been a while. She's been gone for like 6 or 7 years.
Oh, yeah, it was when, yeah, I worked.
Longer than that.
Yeah, longer than that,
Because
yeah.
Lord Christmas
Well, it
is
might have
seven.
been that long, so we've been doing it right.
Well, yeah, it was, because it was when it was maybe like 2005. Yeah. Okay.
Does anybody else have any questions about invoicing?
I will just say thank you for communicating. That's been my biggest bugaboo for the last year. Everything was shut down. I was flying blind, so thank you.
And I am going to make a habit of every public communication that we put out from our department, I'm going to make sure that you all receive an email saying, hey, just to make sure that you're aware this is happening. And I will also do follow-up calls to make sure that people that didn't respond to my emails are aware and that they come in. Okay? Well, thank you so much for coming. I truly appreciate all of your time. Thank you.